The year 2019 was the World Blitz Championship, where Magnus Carlsen, the best chess player in the world, faced a young and talented opponent, Norbek Abdusattorov, who had been crushing opponents. Magnus had just won 3 consecutive Blitz championships and was widely considered the favorite to win this one as well. However, he didn't take the Uzbek prodigy seriously enough, and that would come back to haunt him. Let me warn you guys, if you have a weak heart, it could be dangerous. The game began with Magnus playing his favorite opening move d4, with Abdusattorov replying with his nimble nf6. Magnus then brought his knight to f3 and deployed his bishop to g5, signaling his intention to control the center of the board. The game becomes a fairly standard opening sequence so far as Magnus entered the Tor attack. Magnus then launched a pawn assault with c4, putting pressure on Black's position. Sensing the threat, Abdusattorov castled his king to safety. Magnus then brought his queen out to the battlefield and played qc2. Abdusattorov responded by pushing his h-pawn, creating a luft for his king. After some exchanges, Magnus played h4, which was a bold move. He was trying to push his g-pawn to g4 and g5 against the black pawns on the white squares. Then g6 and c3. Abdusattorov entered in a completely new variation of this position by putting his bishop on g7 square. Carlsen then castled on the queen side. Abdusattorov responded with c6, closing the center and preventing Magnus from launching any attacks there. After some more developing moves and a pawn-hunting adventure, Magnus played bd3. Black moved his knight and frayed his bishop, and he certainly had the plan to pin White's knight. But these cheap tricks do not work on the goat, as he calmly moves his rook. After a couple of moves, Magnus wants his knight at f4, which will be a deadly knight. Of course, Abdusattorov does not allow that, and plays bg4. Here, both players just want to show their aggression as the bishop attacks an undefended knight, and Magnus saves that knight and attacks that bishop instead. Here, a strange exchange happens. Abdusattorov then moves his rook to the c-file, hoping to gain space with c5. Magnus pushes his f-pawn, which weakens his e-pawn and makes it a backward pawn. Such a classy move. Abdusattorov immediately goes after the pawn by moving his rook, and White defends. But that does not stop the attack as nc4 was coming, but unfortunately, it was a blunder. The best move would have been just to push the c-pawn. Magnus spotted this immediately and just grabs the pawn advantage. Then, a tricky move from the young star QE4+. Again, Magnus played the only good move and blocked with his queen, also disallowing the infiltration on QG2. Abdusattorov goes back, Magnus defends. Black moves his rook to solidify the position, Carlsen attacks the queen. The queen runs away. Now Magnus is to improve the position. He takes a generation to think about what to do next, and after some mind calculations, he settles for the move queen to f2 as everything is defended and prepared to push f5. In response, Abdusattorov tried to double up his rook, but Magnus played f5 anyway. After some maneuvering and creating space, Abdusattorov set up a genius trap for Magnus Carlsen by playing queen to g4. Unfortunately for the champion, he fell right into it. Instead of going QE3, Magnus went with a questionable approach of nf4. Sadly, that was the move when White lost his advantage. I mean, look at the evaluation bar. Magnus missed something here. Can you guess? Okay, let me do the hard work. Look, if the rook captures at e4, then the rook captures the rook, and queen to d1 is mate. Yeah, even a world-class player like Magnus can miss something so simple. He almost broke the table with rage, but barely controlled his anger. To avoid this, he just needed to play queen to e3. As Magnus can't take back with the rook, as his king's life was at stake, he just moved his rook aside. After queen f1, it was actually Black who was better, as there could be some nasty discovery attacks. I mean, Abdusattorov can literally win the queen. Magnus said, "Not today," and moved his king to safety. Then the game goes on for some moves, jumping onto each other's weaknesses. Then Magnus levels the advantage by centralizing his knight to d5. Finally, Magnus was just gaining momentum. After a couple of moves, Magnus had a pawn advantage. Now, if he could trade everything off, then maybe he could unleash his endgame beast, which obviously Abdusattorov declined. As time was ticking away, both players played a fantastic game of chess. And finally, the rook and knight bishop trade happened. At this point, it was anyone's game, and there was barely any time left. It was here, on move 51, both players agreed to a draw. Surely, there were some ups and downs in the game, but the game still ended in a draw. Or did it? Magnus almost lost to a 15-year-old. He had to try hard to secure a draw. It was not the end of the Uzbek's attack, as he went on to win the 2021 Blitz Championship just 2 years later. Magnus then congratulated the underdog and swore a sacred vow not to mock a child again. That was intense.